Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for attending today. My name is Alex Koral. I'm a Regulatory General Counsel, actually, for Sovos ShipCompliant. And I am here to talk about essential compliance and regulatory concerns for craft brewers. First, I just want to really thank the Craft Beer Professionals organization for inviting me again. This is really a great conference. I think there's so much great information out here. So it's really tremendous to see how much engagement there is and how much activity there is in trying to inform this industry and bring everybody into a compliant and successful business industry. So it's just great to see and really happy to be part of this. Again, I'm here to talk about compliance and regulatory concerns as sort of my beat. And specifically, we're here to talk about interstate distributions and other concerns when you are selling to distributors, selling to retailers. What are the sort of things you need to know when you're getting set up and as you're extending this? Because as you'll see, there is frankly a lot involved and it can get complicated and it can be fraught if you do something wrong. These are this kind of general regulatory concerns that if you are violating a law, if you are missing some due dates, something like that, these are reasons that a state can try to fine you, do some compliance action against you, which can really ruin things and maybe stymie your future plans for development. So again, this is all about getting ahead of those compliance concerns, understanding what your needs are, what you need to be doing and following up on, so that those risks don't become reality. First, add a little bit of background. Who is Sovos ShipCompliant? We've been working with the CBP for a little bit now, but I'm sure there's a few people who may not have a great understanding. Sovos ShipCompliant is a software solution. We are a cloud-based software as a service provider, which offers compliance support for breweries, wineries, retailers, distilleries, basically everybody in the beverage alcohol industry that is making interstate distributions, interstate direct-to-consumer shipments. We are all about reducing the complexity and providing support for your interstate distributions, informing the industry, reducing your compliance burdens, and accelerating your time to bring products to market. As I said, we are very active in the direct-to-consumer market, providing a full suite of tax rates, tax returns, shipping reports, in order-by-order checks as well. But we are also very involved in three-tiered distribution. Again, doing product registrations, tax reporting, all those sort of things you need to do in order to make sure that you are distributing your beer, sending it around the country compliantly, quickly, and being able to expand your market into new and valuable areas. So with that behind us, we can move into the actual gist of my presentation today because there is kind of a lot to it. So I'm going to talk quickly a little bit about what is compliance, what do we mean by this, what you need to know. Then we'll get into the rules for distribution. What are those generic general rules that are out there, the things you should be aware of and tracking and trying to understand on a state-by-state basis as you do expand your presence. And then we'll talk a little bit about the consequences of non-compliance. But again, the gist of this is really going to be understanding those basic rules so that you can move forward in a productive manner. So first off, what is regulatory compliance? And this is really, frankly, a very basic question that I don't think we need to dwell on. I don't think it's going to surprise anybody. Regulatory compliance is just following the rules of the road. And it's the same within alcohol as it is within, everything. It's following the rules of the road. It's like when you're driving, you stop at red lights, you stop at stop signs, you don't speed, you don't drive on the sidewalk. Those are those basic things that we all follow and understand in order to have a safe and healthy world out there, so people aren't crashing into each other. It's the same within the alcohol market. There are a lot of rules and regulations that dictate who can do what, where, and how, and frankly, they do get very detailed and often complicated when it comes to alcohol. There are frankly a lot of maybe outdated, a little bit of nonsensical rules out there, but these are still the rules out there, and these are what state regulators, what state law officials will be using and following up on to make sure that you are, again, compliant with their system, their state laws. And it's, unfortunately, you can't really say this doesn't make sense. I don't understand why I can't deliver directly to a retailer in a different state. I don't know why I have to send something to a distributor's warehouse, for example. It's, kind of is what it is. It's the rules of the state. And if they don't think you're following them, then that is some reason that they may have for, again, issuing you fines, issuing you notices, revoking licenses, all these dire consequences that can really affect your business. And so that's why it's important to, first understand what these rules are and then do abide by them so that you can continue to expand your business and grow. And when we are looking at these rules, it really is the 50 shades of booze, as they call it. Under the 21st Amendment, there is great authority given to each individual state to establish and regulate their own individual alcohol market. And so when you are engaging with a individual state's alcohol market, you need to abide by what state's laws. So if you are a California brewery and you're now going to be selling into Arizona or Nevada, you may understand California rules great. And California is frankly a pretty liberal state in what it does allow breweries to do. But you need to understand that those restrictions, that there are greater restrictions in Arizona, in Nevada, there are different rules, and you need to abide by those states' rules as you are selling there. So again, this is all about breaking down the individual states and doing a lot of research and that initial sort of checks on what are the specific rules in each state as you do expand. So you can't just rely on California lets me do this when you're selling in Arizona. You do really need to dig down into Arizona's laws. And why does this matter? Again, it's because failing to follow the rules brings consequences. If you, run a red light, you can get a fine, you can get a ticket, you might lose your license if you do it a lot. It's the same thing within alcohol as well. If you fail to follow the rules, there are fines and penalties. And I'm sure that we've all heard of some breweries somewhere being shut down, being issued fines for doing something wrong. I think that a lot of us consider this to be sales to minors on the day-to-day basis, but these affect everything. These can come up when you're doing any type of sales. If you're failing to register products, any of these sort of rules we'll talk about today. Again, these are reasons that states might be able to issue fines. They do ratchet up if you are a repeat offender. And if you really are getting at this, you can lose your license. And loss of license really does have some bad knock-on consequences because they can affect your other licenses. You may need to report that to your home. If say you're selling into Arizona revokes your license to sell there, you may need to report that to your home state agency, and that can be a reason for them to consider you maybe a suspect actor when it comes to alcohol, and maybe a reason for them to revoke other licenses all the way up to your production license. And if that happens, well, then you're kind of out of this business, and nobody wants that to happen. So again, this is all about ensuring that you minimize your risk, you do not break the rules, and that you don't get into any of these risky behaviors where you might get fines, you might lose your license. Again, managing this and not getting in trouble is the name of the game here. So what do we want to know when we're talking about distributing beer? Again, this is about selling into the three-tier system, selling to retailers, and this gets really complex. These are rules dating all the way back to the 1930s as the United States was developing its post-prohibition market. Of course, there have been a lot of changes over the years, a lot of additions in franchising rules and other types of situations that we'll talk about. But there are a lot of steps, so let's kind of get into them. The first thing is to recognize the difference between selling in your home state and selling in other states, because there really is a lot of things you can do in your home state that you may not necessarily be able to do when you're selling into another state. And a lot of these permissions that you are able to do in your home state have been hard fought over the last couple decades as the rise of the craft brewing industry has really progressed in pretty much every state now. There are these permissions for at least small producers, if not, larger size breweries as well. And in my experience, in my studying the history of this, we really can tell that it is the states that have these more liberal rules, allow more permissions for craft brewers that have really developed craft beer industries. I don't want to say better because there's great beer produced everywhere, but you can just see that there are, those states like Oregon or Colorado or California that really got ahead of this, and how much more expansive and thorough their markets are than maybe other states that are gotten this a little bit later. But that is to say, again, there are a lot of permissions you can do locally. And these are getting beyond just being a manufacturer. So there are now in pretty much every state, and I think in actually every state, you can do on-premise sampling. You can sell a pint for somebody who comes in, and they don't even necessarily need to do a tour of your facilities first. In a lot of states, you can sell to go. You can sell cans, you can sell six-packs, you can sell growlers. Again, not universal. There are states that do prohibit this, but there are very expansive, and they are out there. And so you may be doing this already a lot and presuming that this could be a means to access other states as well. Again, there are a lot of relaxation of some of the tied house rules out there. These are rules that restrict interaction between different tiers. So the supplier tier, a producer versus a retailer tier, your off-premise liquor store. They allow you to self-distribution. You might not need to go through a distributor to sell into your local stores or to sell to local restaurants. You may even be able to open up your own restaurant. So again, these are just all these state-by-state considerations of what they allow, what permissions they grant, how relaxed they might be about some of these restrictions. But you always want to be aware specifically of what licenses you hold and what they allow you to do. You may have a beer manufacturing license that doesn't itself allow you to do self-distribution. You may need to then get a separate wholesaler license in order to do self-distribution. But check with your state if that is permissible, if you can have both a manufacturer and a distributor license. Again, this can get complicated, but I think that a lot of brewers are pretty aware of what they can do locally because you're really concerned with what you're building at your local market. So what we really want to get into a little bit more is interstate distributions, because this really does throw a wrench into some of those plans. You may have your tasting room, your restaurant, where you're doing great business, but now you want to sell into a different state. And you are suddenly trapped because a lot of those local permissions are not available. States are really, really, really jealous of their three-tier systems. They give a great deal of privilege to the three-tier systems, to their local businesses to guide and manage their local alcohol businesses, their alcohol markets. And again, this goes back to days of post-prohibition, where it was really seen that states need to have, or local communities even, really need to have great control of their markets to prevent what was perceived as the pre-prohibition, free-ranging alcohol sales and a lot of undue pressure from foreign interests. By foreign interests, they just meant a bunch of breweries in Missouri, but it still, has that permission, that sense of, you don't want Kansas mom and pop restaurants being pressured by a Missouri brewery to sell too much. So states gave a lot of deference, a lot of power to local businesses to control their systems. And this really has developed into the modern three-tier system. Of course, a lot of other market changes have happened around the years, but that's another long discussion for another day. So really what we're looking at, again, is this strict three-tier system in interstate distributions. So this is a model where you have a producer, you, the brewery, the manufacturer, has to sell to a distributor. It has to sell to a distributor licensed in that state, operating in that state, and they are the only entity that can sell to the local retailers, those liquor stores, the restaurants, bars, whoever is going to then sell on to the customer. So a lot of those self-distribution allowances that you might be able to do in your home state are generally not allowed in interstate distribution. There are really only a handful of states out there that do allow out-of-state manufacturers to self-distribute to local retailers. States like Washington, Montana, often these require additional licensing and special permissions, but they're also not very common. So, don't presume that if you're going to start selling into Texas, you can find some sort of way to self-distribute. This also goes to samples. Again, these may need to be going through distributors or retailers. You may not be able to operate directly in another state. You may have to have a salesperson, a licensed party who's representing you. And so again, just be aware of these restrictions that you may assume are available because you do them in your home state, not available because now you're selling into a different state. We won't talk a lot about direct-to-consumer shipping, but this is a growing field. Again, there's a lot of interest in having this direct connection, getting some of the money that the wine industry has gotten over the years. And this is growing, it's developing. We want to see it expand. but it is still fairly limited. So again, you shouldn't necessarily presume that if you're going to be selling into Texas, you can sell to consumers. You're almost certainly going to have to go through this strict 3-tier system, selling to distributors who sell to retailers who sell to consumers. And this can even apply to incidental sales and events and conferences. If you go to a festival in a different state, you may need to get licensed in that state. You may need to sell your products to a distributor before you can then sell them again. So these get really thorough and really, they're applying all the time. So you do want to be aware of them. As you are entering another state, you really want to be aware, again, of what the rules in that state are. And so it's very important to investigate what's going on, what are the specific parameters of each state, because while they do rhyme, there are a lot of similarities in licensing, taxes. None of them are ever exactly the same. And you don't want to be applying Ohio's laws when you're selling it to Virginia, because Virginia is not going to take very kindly of that. So you want to reach out to the specific department. There are different agencies in every state, liquor commissions, beverage control agencies, divisions of the Department of Revenue, these specific agencies who will be issuing you licenses, who will be monitoring you, who might be doing enforcement. They're the agencies you want to reach out to and understand what their specific rules are. And these do really follow a general track of this setup, the implementation, and the follow-up. With a different, specific parameters in each step as you are, again, creating your market, you are making your sales, and then you're following up to make sure you can expand and continue those sales. So let's get into what some of these specifics are. First off, we always want to start off with getting licensed, because that is really the first thing to do. When you are getting into a new state, you really want to make sure that you have basically this permission to be selling into a state. And that is what a license does. It licenses your ability to sell in that state. Again, these are state by state, so you do need a new license for each state you're selling into. Again, your California brewery license does not matter when you want to sell into Arizona. You need that Arizona out-of-state craft brewery, out-of-state supplier type license. So that's important. You always want to make sure you're applying for the right license. You don't want to apply for an Arizona brewery license, because that means you need to set up a production facility there. You need to get a deed and all that sort of stuff. So make sure that you get the one that says out-of-state supplier. Be aware of any volume limits there might be. They might have restrictions of you can only get the craft brewery license if you produce under a certain amount of beer in a year. Make sure you get one that does include beer. Don't get the wine or spirits license. And it's just, again, very important, because, this is, again, this very initial permission that's allowed. If you're selling into a state without a license, that means you're selling without permission. And that's a very obvious violation that a state will go after people for. So, they see your product on the shelves. They don't recognize you as a licensee. Very easy for them to say, violation is happening here. We need to issue some enforcement. Licenses can get costly. There are some states where it's $50 to sell to distributors. There are other states where it can be a couple $1,000s every year. So you want to be aware of what those restrictions are, so you recognize the states with that best return on investment, so you're not going after bad. And it can also be a lot of time to get these licenses. There's a lot of information that may need to be required to be provided. It's not generally as complicated as getting your production license, as getting your TTB license. But you do want to have a lot of that records on hand, your lists of investors, of all their personal information, so that you can kind of get through these licenses quick. Once you have your licenses, you want to be able to recognize what products you can actually sell. And this brings up the consideration of product registrations. And we're going to we'll start with at the federal level, because all interstate sales of beer require this federal label approval, this certificate of label approval, or a COLA, as it's called. And a certificate of label approval, the COLA, is issued by the TTB, the federal government, as a proof that you have a valid label, that you have a label that is in compliance with both the Internal Revenue Code requirements and the Federal Alcohol Administration Act requirements. Although the COLA is only active under the FAAA, that there are a lot of, again, required and prohibited information on labels that you may need to get approved. Notably, Again, colas only are required if they meet the conditions of that Federal Alcohol Administration Act. And the Federal Alcohol Administration Act only applies for interstate sales of beer. So if you are a small craft brewery and you're only selling in your home state, you may not have any colas. That's not required. That's perfectly fine. But once you do then sell interstate, you do go into Nevada, you do go into Arizona, that becomes an interstate sale and the FAAA is triggered and you do need to get a cola. So you want to get ahead of this. You want to make sure you have these colas on hand so that you're not selling and in violation of federal law. How do you get a cola? It's actually really fairly simple, fairly straightforward. The TTB has done a tremendous job over the last few years improving the cola approval system. It used to take months possibly to get a cola. It now takes less than a couple of weeks, maybe even less than 1 week. They've done a lot to improve it. There's a lot of online systems. This is a service we also help out with, so I just want to plug us a little bit with Sovos. One important place to start is reading the BAM. There's a lot of great information on the TTB website, including this beverage alcohol manual or BAM. This will go through all the things that are required on a label, prohibited on a label, all the steps to make sure you get that label approved the first time. Notably, the TTB does not reject labels. What they do is they submit it, they resend it back for revision and reapplication. So you won't ever get a no from the TTB. You just need to get back in the line at the start and take again. And so if you keep having a cola sent back for revisions, that can add weeks, months to your go-to-market time. So again, this is why it's important to understand those requirements so you get ahead of it and get your label approved right away as soon as possible. Now, we do have an asterisk here on beer, and that is because there is another limitation within the Federal Alcohol Administration Act as what is a beer. And a beer for under the FAAA is that it's a malt-based, a barley malt alcoholic drink with hops in it. And so this is a big consideration for a lot of breweries and a lot of other manufacturers out there as they are developing neutral grain alcohol products without hops, that is hard seltzers. Hard seltzers, because they do not meet any condition of the Federal Alcohol Administration Act, fall outside of this cola requirement and actually cannot get a cola. That's perfectly valid. Again, there are a lot of other products that fall into this, notably wines with under 7%, which really means ciders. They're also excluded from colas. And so if you're making one of these products, then you do not need a cola. But you do still need to make sure that your labels are following the rules, following the requirements that are under the general internal revenue code. So that's where we get the government warning, other label considerations. So you can't just have any label you want. There are still rules on the federal level and the state level when it comes to seltzers, ciders, non-beer products. You just may not need a cola. And if you do get a cola, it's not like you're going to, if you do apply for a cola, it's not like you're going to get in trouble for it. It just means that you're going to waste your time because the TTB is going to say, we can't do anything here. So just don't worry about it again if you're making a product that doesn't need a cola. Again, here the thing is reach out to the TTB, review their literature, review what is the processes here so you get ahead of this, make it done quickly. Moving on from the federal registrations, most states also have their own separate product registrations. When you are then selling into, I guess, not Arizona or Nevada a little bit, but well, let's say Texas, let's say Georgia, Colorado, a lot of states do require product registrations of your beers if you're going to be selling into those states. These are all about understanding what's in their market. State regulators will walk down liquor store aisles and check off products, make sure they understand who is selling what and that they have a proper authorization to be in their state. Again, this is to review to make sure that every product has a licensee behind it, every product is being properly distributed, tax paid, all these considerations. And so they want to have a list of all the product registrations. This can be costly. There are, again, states where it's free and easy. There are states where it takes a few weeks to get approval and costs a couple $100s per brand you want to distribute. So again, this is about understanding the specific state regulations, the specific state rules, and understanding them ahead of time so you get ahead of it and get your product to market faster and not, it turns out you're not getting product approval for your summer beers until August, and that kind of can really put a damper on your summer sales schedule. So again, getting ahead of it, making sure you're doing this sooner than later, and not getting caught up in any of these gotchas. Again, this is a service that is very near and dear within Sovos ShipCompliant. We have a lot of support here. So if you want more information on this, please reach out to us. Another consideration within product registrations are price posting. These are you have to provide lists of how much you are charging your distributors. These are not required in all that many states, certainly less than product registrations, but they're out there. These are all about creating fairness and fair dealing within the alcohol industry. Make sure you're not privileging one distributor over another. And they may require advance notice when you want to change prices. So again, you want to be aware of these, getting ahead of them, so that if you want to charge an extra 50 cents come January, you get ahead of that and get that process going in September, July, whenever it might be required the previous year, so that you can actually get that price change in effect when you want. Now, when it comes to product registrations, and this is, I'll get back to how this affects product registrations in just a minute, but it's also critical as you are setting up your distribution models, as you are setting up your sales in different states, to have good distributor arrangements, good distributor agreements and relationships, because not only is it required by law to work with a distributor, it can be a really good, mutually beneficial relationship. Distributors can be a fantastic resource when selling into a different state. They are a local representative. They can be a brand ambassador. They can partner with you compliance. They understand the rules of the state they're operating in. They're supposed to be a local connection, getting you access to that local market, getting you access to the local awareness, so that you can have, again, this symbiotic growth relationship with them. And again, you almost always have to sell through a distributor. So this is why it's important to get ahead of this. Make sure that you are finding good distributors to work with and setting out good distributor agreements that create this beneficial relationship, because it can be very easy. And there are hundreds, I'm sure, of horror stories out there of bad distributor relationships, bad distributor agreements, where a brewery just signed something that they were handed, and now they're stuck in this terrible relationship where they're forced to work with this one distributor, they're forced to sell through them only, but the distributor is not acting as a good actor. They're not selling their product actively, they're not actually distributing them, they're putting focus on other brands, and the brewery is stuck in it. It's very easy to get stuck in a harmful relationship. And so that's why it's very important to set out and review any agreements you were provided by a distributor. Do not just sign on the dotted line. Do not just sign any boilerplate. Definitely, absolutely work with an attorney on this and make sure you understand all of the considerations, all of the terms and requirements that will be imposed on you as you are signing these agreements. And also make sure that you set out and put in your own requirements, your own asks and requirements of your distributors, so that you set out conditions of what is a good faith action, how can they be a beneficial actor, beneficial partner for you going forward, so you don't get stuck in a harmful relationship. And why am I talking about this in terms of general compliance? It's because again, there are a lot of state rules that restrict these. And these rules are called generally franchise rules. Although, learned over the years, it's not really a franchise, but again, a different consideration, different topic there. Generally, when we're talking about these franchise rules, these are rules that restrict and limit your ability to work with distributors and to change your existing distributor relationships. And again, I know I just said this, but absolutely work with an attorney. Talk to an expert, a local beverage alcohol attorney who understands that state's specific rules when you are ever involved in any franchise situation, because these get very complex and very fraught. There's a lot of specific and alcohol specific considerations here. You talk to a generic trademark attorney, a generic deals attorney, and they might not believe you that these rules exist, because they kind of stretch the credulity of what is allowed under law in terms of states being able to affect contracts and affect private business. But they're out there, they are relevant, they are in effect, and they will affect and change your distributor relationships if you don't get ahead of these. So what are the sort of considerations when you are looking at franchise rules? Again, these are how you're setting up your distributor relationships. These can limit the number of distributors you work with. These can limit the areas in which the territories in which your distributors can operate. They can say you can only have one distributor per brand in the entire state. They might say that you can have multiple distributors per brand in the state, but only one per each county, or you can have multiple distributors across different counties, but you can only have one operating in each county, or other sort of territory considerations. They can require you to prevent changes to they can prevent your ability to change your contracts, to cancel agreements, to terminate. And so you want to be aware of these restrictions and how they might affect your distributor relationships. A very common one is that franchise rules will require showings of bad faith on a distributor's part if you want to terminate a relationship. But then the question is, what is bad faith? And the statute might even say out what is bad faith. It might specifically direct that bad faith is, nothing short of dumping your beer down the storage drain. And you want to be aware of that, because if that is the height of what a distributor needs to do in order for you to terminate the contract, that might not be a very good state for you to operate in, because they can really they can not sell your product, they can minimize your interest there, and there's nothing you can do about it, because these franchise rules would restrict you from canceling your agreement if you've already signed. On the other hand, if there is no definition of, say, bad faith, this is something to put in your contract with your distributor. You can have clear designated criteria for what is bad faith, what is good faith on their part, so that you can point to this in a dispute and say, you did not meet my expectations or agreed upon expectations. Therefore, I have cause now to cancel my agreement, to change the terms of my agreement. And so you really want to be aware of what these restrictions are when you are developing your distributor agreement, so you can write these into your contracts. Make sure that this is all set out, all very clear. Everybody knows what their expectations are, so that if anything does go sour, you know how to move through and not be stuck in a bad deal. And you do often have to, states will often police these agreements. You often have to file your agreements with the state. You have to provide them notice. You have to work through state advisory groups if you want to change your terminate your contract. The state may often require you to give your distributor time to fix, another 6 months where they're not doing anything, because the state requires you to give them 6 months to do time to fix those problems you've reported. So again, it's just being aware of what these restrictions are, so that in 2 years you're not tearing your hair out because it turns out you signed a bad agreement with a distributor and now you can't cancel it because there are these franchise rules that restrict when you can cancel anything. And again, really do work with an attorney, do work with an expert in alcohol law who can help guide you through this system, because these are very unique to the alcohol industry. And so they can throw somebody for a loop if you're not aware, not tracking these. And why do these matter when it comes to brand registrations? I'm sorry, I think I missed a slide here. Yeah, I'm sorry, I thought I had a slide here. Again, it's very quick. Basically, you often need to include your franchise agreements, your territory outlays, your maps with a brand registration. It's very common to have basically additional information that must go. It's not just, here's my license, here's a check, and here's my brand. It can often, your brand registrations can often include, here is a map of the territories my distributor is authorized to deal in. Here is a copy of my brand authorization forms. Here is a copy of my distributor agreement. Again, these are all just records you want to have on hand as you are doing brand registrations, so that you don't need to spend another week digging through your filing cabinet to dig out this information. Again, getting your products to market earlier, but then also just making sure that these agreements are worked out well in advance, so that you're not caught off by anything, that you have a beneficial relationship for your entire future in the states you're selling into. And of course, this is not setting up your distributor relationship are not the only distributor concerns out there. It's not just signing lines and paying and cutting checks and getting licenses. There are a lot of just day-to-day considerations when it comes to distribution. So there are things called come-to-rest laws. These affect how your logistics can work, that you may require you to go actually to a distributor warehouse. You cannot deliver, even if you are selling through a distributor, the distributor is the operator when you're selling to a retailer. You may not be able to have your trucks go directly to a retailer's location. You may actually have to go to a distributor's warehouse, have your products unloaded and then reloaded, maybe just bump the dock. Again, just being aware of what these logistics rules are so that you set out your systems in place well in advance of actually selling into a state. We talked a little bit about them. Be aware of sample restrictions. There are a lot of states that require, excuse me, the samples only to be sold through retailers or possibly through distributors or through licensed sales parties, salespersons, state representatives. Just be aware that you may not be able to walk into a state yourself and hand out samples. Also be aware that samples are a type of 3-tier distribution. You do need to report those sales to the state and possibly pay taxes on them. And then be aware of tied house rules. Again, these are very common when it comes to in-state sales as well. But these are just rules that limit your ability to advertise, talk to, deal with retailers, provide them things of value. And again, these vary state by state. So, in one state, you may be able to provide retailers with coasters. In another state, you may not be able to. And just be aware of what these restrictions are, because people do get caught by these. Have been major enforcement actions on people violating these tied house rules, getting involved in payoffs to retailers for preferred tap lines, that sort of thing. And you want to be aware of these restrictions so that you don't, again, get caught in anything. Now, once you have made your distributions, you're selling into a state, there's always a lot of follow-up that goes through this and making sure that you are continuing to abide by the state rules and following up on everything, reporting and paying taxes especially. And when it comes to alcohol, taxes are really ubiquitous, these excise taxes. I don't think I really need to get into too many details. I'm sure that everybody on here has dealt with excise taxes to some degree. Excise taxes are, again, like I said, ubiquitous. You have to pay federal excise taxes to the TTB every so often, monthly, annually, depending on how much you're producing. You have to pay taxes to your home state on what you produce. And you also have to pay taxes, or taxes must be paid at least, on interstate distributions as well. Again, these vary state by state. These are based on the volume that is sold. Often it's in per barrels or per gallons. And these are taxes that should be built into the price of beer. So this is important to get a handle of as you're selling into a different state, so you can set your prices. You can set out this expectation with your distributor. You understand where that $6 per barrel is coming from, so that you sell a barrel for $100 into a state. You know that $6 of that $100 will then be going to Texas, for example, to the Texas government, and you understand where that money is coming from. So you can maybe sell your barrel instead for $106, so that it's set out that way. Again, the manufacturer, the brewer, is generally responsible for federal taxes and home state taxes. These are based on your production, what you're removing from bond, what you're putting into the sales practice. That's when you have a tax liability in your home state for the federal government. When it comes to interstate sales, this is often paid by the first party to own product, which is usually your distributor. That's the party to take ownership in that other state. However, this is not universal. There are several states out there, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, just to name a few, that do require an out-of-state supplier, you, the brewery, to pay your own taxes. So you want to be aware of that. And so just make sure that you can handle that. You have the funds to pay your taxes on hand, that you are filing that regularly, you are providing a state with this information. And very important, when you are selling interstate, that is exemptable from your home state taxes. So don't pay excise taxes twice. That is to say, if you are selling into a different state, your home state should have a line on that tax form for sales out of state. These are exemptable sales. You do not need to pay your home state tax on interstate sales. So make sure you're filling out that deduction line on your home state taxes and not paying both California and Texas taxes on a sale that you've made into Texas. You only need to pay those state taxes once. Federal, different game, but state taxes only pay them once. The corollary to excise taxes are shipping reports. Again, not every state requires you to pay excise taxes yourself. They often put that on your distributor, but they then would require you to file a shipping report. These are reports of all your past sales in a given period of time, a month, a quarter, a year, depends on probably on how much volume or the specific state. And again, these are not reports that necessarily need to include any tax information, but they do require you to detail all of your sales made into a state. Use the state-provided forms. These are state-specific. There is, various variations on them. Make sure you're using the forms specific for out-of-state beer suppliers. You don't want to use a beer wholesaler report. That'll include a lot of information, and frankly, the state won't even accept it to begin with. So you want to make sure you're using the state-provided forms. You're filing on time and accurately, including all the required information. That information can be very simple. Pardon me. I'm losing my voice here. There can be, very simple from just the total volume you shipped. Hey, we shipped, 1,000 gallons in this last month, and here are distributors. You should expect taxes from these distributors on 1,000 gallons. Or they can be very complex. They can require you to detail all of your shipments and all the information. So what day did you deliver? What was the weight of this package? How much volume was in each shipment you made to a distributor? What is your distributor license name? What are the specific brands in each of those sales? Again, these can vary in their complexity. So you just want to be aware of when you're entering a new state, what will your reporting requirements be? Can you handle this? Are those reports available to you? And can you manage this? Because again, if you're not following up, if you're not filing these reports, that is a big reason for a state to say, we're going to issue a fine. We do not think you're a good actor. We may not renew your license next year. All these sort of things can build up on themselves and really get you into a trap if you're not capable of managing the compliance considerations. So you always want to be aware of what is required when you're following up, because it's great if you can get a license, but then if you can't necessarily do the shipping reports too, if you can't necessarily do your brand registrations, if you can't necessarily work out a distributor relationship that is beneficial to you, will be helpful, then it might kind of be for fraud, for not. So you want to be aware of these restrictions and managing them making sure you can manage them in a compliant manner, getting ahead of all these restrictions, because again, compliance again is just following the rules of the road. And if they see you swerving, if they see you speeding, that's when a state will issue enforcement. They will go after you. They will try to, rectify the situation, and that could be to your detriment. So just making sure you're aware and handling everything. Quickly talking about direct-to-consumer shipping. Again, this is a very active, very interesting field. These are ways that maybe you can work around the three-tier system, work around those distributors and retailers to connect directly to your consumers. And the most important thing is that most states do not allow direct consumer shipping of beer. There are really only about 10-ish states that do. There are a lot of regulatory concerns around them: licensing, tax payments, sales tax payments, brand registrations, per volume shipment limits, total volume shipments, all sorts of restrictions that can apply. And so you really want to be aware of what those specific regulations are. Be aware of the states that do allow it, and make sure you're not shipping into states that don't actually allow it. And be aware of there are a lot of services out there that do advertise very expansive direct-to-consumer shipping programs. A lot of them do work with local retailers, sort of a drizzly type situation, which can be perfectly legitimate. But be aware that some of them are frankly not so legitimate. And so don't start working with a party that says, yeah, we're shipping beer into Utah, nobody cares. That is like, a very clear indication that they're doing something probably wrong. And so just, very, very careful sniff test there. Make sure that everything is working out, because you can get caught up on that. I'll just say I did give a presentation at this Springs conference, the Spring Craft Brewers Brew Professionals conference. So there should be my presentation online somewhere. I do recommend people reach out to that. So if you want more information, you can look at our website for one, sovos.com/ShipCompliant, or again, my Spring CBP presentation on direct-to-consumer shipping. There's a lot of interest in COVID permissions that happened this last year. Frankly, they did not change a whole lot. There were a lot that affected local retailers, to-go cocktails, pickup, curbside pickups. But a lot of these direct-to-consumer shipping permissions that were enabled last summer were not made permanent. We do hope there will be a lot of legislation in the following years to expand direct-to-consumer shipping to make this much more of a viable option for everybody. But we're still holding our breath there. And I think a big thing, if you're interested in this, is connecting to your consumers, getting them to reach out to local legislators to change the laws, because that's what we need. We need the laws to change, and that comes from constituents action, grassroots action, individual consumers saying that I want to be able to get access to beer that across the country that I like, because it's limited. I can't get this distributed locally. I need to have it shipped to me, and we need those laws to change so that we can make this a much more viable, much more expansive market. And finally, just when we're talking about, as I was saying, all those consequences, these really build up on themselves. They can be costly. The fines get expensive. One time may be manageable. 3 times, could be tens of thousands of dollars if you're doing something wrong. There have been hundreds of thousands of dollars. Some businesses even charged millions in the last couple of years for really expansive penalties. So you really want to be aware of these so you're not getting in over your head. And again, loss of license can be a huge impact. It means you have to stop all the activity under that license immediately. So stopping distribution, that can be a waste of time and money, and it can limit your future expansion, because you need to tell other states, yeah, I lost a license in Texas. Maybe then Missouri is going to think that you're not the best actor to be getting a license in Missouri. And again, really be aware of those distributor relationships. Make sure you're getting your agreements worked out. You understand all the nuances of that. You are working with an attorney to figure everything out, because that can be an extremely complex, extremely costly, and time-consuming program if you have a bad relationship in Texas and your distributor is not acting on your behalf, and you need to get out of it. Again, you can be stuck there for many, many years, unable to sell broadly in that state because you were stuck in this bad distributor relationship. So again, there was a lot in that, and I think that there are individual bullets on this slide that can probably fill out an entire hour-long conference. So I hope I didn't rush through too much and kind of gave everybody a general sense of what's out there. Again, this is a state-by-state consideration, so this is all about understanding what's the specific licensing requirements in this new state I wanted to get into. What are the franchise rules in this state, as opposed to having thinking that these rules apply universally and what works in California will automatically work in Arizona. You got to understand Arizona individually and just be aware that these are sort of the general things that might be there. They may not exist. Not every state has franchise rules. And so you may be able to have an open distributor relationship there. But you just want to be aware of when they do exist. You don't get caught up on them, and you get ahead of this. So again, you expand your market, you sell more beer, you expand your ability to sell and have a beneficial and expansive market out there. You distribute more, and you get into more states, and your consumers are happier because they see more of you. With that, I will try to catch my breath. Again, if you want any more information about Sovos ShipCompliant, about what we can offer, we do have a lot of free resources on our website, information about beer distribution rules, information about beer direct-to-consumer shipping. Please look up our website, sovos.com/shipcompliant. If there are any questions, I've got time. I can hang around here for a little bit. I know, sure, there was a lot out there, but it could just be also overwhelming. So if you have questions, please feel free to enter them in. I'm going to take that as a sign that I was very thorough, or hopefully not too confusing, not too speaking too fast. Again, if you want to reach out, look up our website. My name is Alex Koral, alex.koral@sovos.com. If you want more information, happy to talk about this. And again, just a big thank you to CBP, Andrew, everybody there, and thank you to the audience for listening to me today, letting me take some time and talk about this complex area of alcohol sales. And I hope you all success and a lot of great production and great beer out there. So thanks again, and until next time.